One important thing you need to realize is that these people usually react far more to how you behave than to what you actually say. Someone can say over and over that they're completely finished with the relationship, but if their real behavior still shows strong emotional reactivity, it points to the exact opposite of what they claim. Your immediate reaction often becomes the roadmap for whatever they do next. If you come across as deeply wounded in your reply, they might quickly switch into a tone of sympathy and concern. If you sound clearly angry, they might instantly cast themselves as the misunderstood or wronged one in the story. If you sound hopeful or sentimental, they might jump at the chance to respond with fresh affection and encouragement. If you sound weighed down by guilt, they may push even harder and increase their emotional pressure. In so many ways, your unfiltered emotional response becomes their main point of reference. This is exactly why staying emotionally calm matters so much. A steady, neutral reply completely throws off the pattern they were counting on. A slower reply, a carefully measured tone, or even no response at all, creates instant uncertainty for them. Uncertainty is something they truly struggle to handle because it directly chips away at their sense of control and influence. A calm or minimal reply takes away the exact emotional reaction they were hoping to get. It immediately breaks the script they fully expected you to keep following. Right at that moment, their strong confidence in being able to reach your emotional life starts to fade noticeably. When people like this come back after a long stretch of silence, the tone they choose is usually deliberate. They rarely open with something aggressive or confrontational. Instead, they tend to approach through easy familiarity, gentle warmth, fond memories, or a soft emotional touch. These particular approaches are designed to lower your guard as fast as possible. They might suddenly show up as unusually kind, surprisingly thoughtful, quiet and reflective, genuinely worried, or emotionally exposed. Or, on the flip side, they might present themselves as deeply stressed, completely confused, painfully lonely, totally overwhelmed, or emotionally shaky. Both of these different approaches ultimately serve the very same purpose underneath. The main goal is to lower your emotional defenses enough for them to slip back in. Warmth and gentleness help you forget the sting of their earlier distance and neglect. Showing vulnerability is meant to instantly stir up your natural empathy and compassion. Empathy is often something they know exactly how to trigger whenever it works in their favor. In many cases, what looks like raw vulnerability on the surface isn't emotional honesty at all. It often functions as nothing more than a clever tool for influence and manipulation. This point matters a lot because keeping emotional distance naturally brings real clarity to your mind. As time goes by and healthy space opens up, the confusing emotional static starts to fade away completely. Your everyday thinking becomes noticeably clearer. The emotional intensity around you naturally loosens its hold. Your inner confidence slowly comes back to full strength. At the same time, people like this will often pick up on it when your emotional distance starts growing. Whenever they sense their hold over you slipping, they tend to quickly adjust how they communicate. They might suddenly become much softer, far more understanding, more thoughtful, or unusually open emotionally. This abrupt shift can easily stir up real inner conflict for you. It might bring up tempting thoughts, making you wonder if they've truly changed, or if things could actually be different this time. This is exactly where deep confusion tends to build, because short-term softness gets mistaken so easily for real, lasting change. But genuine emotional growth always stays consistent over a long stretch of time. Behavior that only shifts when someone feels their access is at risk is nothing like a stable, lasting transformation. Their warmth tends to spike sharply when they're afraid of losing access to you completely. Their vulnerability may grow stronger whenever they feel a pressing need for reassurance. Their sudden openness may conveniently appear right when they notice your distance getting too wide to manage. This is why their messages can sometimes feel so deeply personal, almost aimed straight at your heart. It can genuinely seem like they remember the exact things that once moved you emotionally. And in a lot of cases, they really do remember those details well. They remember exactly what used to soften your boundaries. They remember what made you forgive their mistakes so easily before. They remember what kept you emotionally hooked during the hardest moments. They remember the specific words that once sparked hope or a strong sense of connection in you. And they use that knowledge on purpose. It's almost never meant for real healing or repair, but instead to win back emotional access to your life. The real motive behind that sudden warmth is rarely about wanting true connection. It's almost always a calculated move to re-engage you. So many people slide right back into draining old cycles because they mistake short-term emotional softness for real, lasting change, but established patterns of behavior will always show the truth eventually. When you consciously choose not to respond after a comeback like this, a completely different mental process starts to unfold. Total silence throws off their expected emotional system entirely. People who depend so heavily on outside emotional reactions suddenly lose their main point of reference. Both positive and negative emotional reactions usually work in their favor somehow. Your anger, your sadness, your longing, your lengthy explanations, or any emotional engagement at all give them clear feedback they can read and use. Silence wipes out that entire feedback loop. When there's no emotional response left for them to read, their uncertainty climbs fast. This total absence of feedback creates real discomfort for them because the emotional loop they were counting on has been completely broken. Choosing silence was never about proving a point or winning some small argument. It's simply about permanently cutting off their access to your emotional world. In so many cases, total silence becomes the strongest boundary you can possibly set, precisely because it refuses to feed their ongoing emotional cycles. It says clearly, without a single word, that your precious emotional energy is no longer being spent on that connection. It shows beyond doubt that your peace of mind no longer depends on whether they're present or absent. This can be incredibly hard for people who thrive on constant emotional influence because your silence completely takes away their sense of impact. It plants deep uncertainty in their mind about their relevance and their real emotional standing in your life. At the very same time, silence works hard to protect your own inner clarity. Even the smallest interaction can instantly reopen a huge wave of emotional confusion. One short message can slowly bring those exhausting emotional patterns right back into your everyday life. A friendly reply can quietly turn into renewed emotional involvement over time. A simple back and forth can slowly restart a toxic cycle that once felt nearly impossible to break free from. Silence actively stops that whole cycle from ever kicking off again. It gives you the space to see things clearly instead of reacting on impulse. It lets your emotional balance come back fully without any outside interference getting in the way. It shields your nervous system from unnecessary emotional strain and stress. It opens up the psychological room needed for real clarity to slowly settle back into your mind. And most importantly, silence becomes a solid boundary that needs no justification, no debate, and no explanation to anyone. You're never required to keep giving emotional access to someone who has repeatedly disturbed your peace. What makes total silence so powerful is that people read it very differently depending on how emotionally mature they are. A grounded, emotionally healthy person will naturally see your silence as a clear boundary, a need for space, a form of closure, or plain disinterest. Someone with deeply manipulative tendencies, though, will almost always read your silence as a serious loss of control. This often pushes them to sharply increase how often they reach out, quickly change their emotional tone, or ramp up their desperate attempts to win back your attention. These reactions usually reveal far more about who they really are than anything they say. Because if their outreach had genuinely been respectful and well-meaning, they would naturally honor your boundary and your distance without any pushback. When someone shows frantic persistence in the face of your clear silence, it consistently points to selfish emotional interest rather than real understanding or care. This is exactly why silence can uncover someone's true intentions so fast. It brings their real motives right to the surface without needing any heated confrontation. Even though choosing silence might feel uncomfortable or unnatural at first, it supports your deep healing far more than continued emotional engagement ever could. Real recovery genuinely requires full distance from repeated emotional disruption, and staying silent naturally builds that safe distance for you. Of course, there are real situations where total silence just isn't an option. Some people are tied together by legal matters, share custody of children, work in the same place, or simply can't avoid regular contact. In these more complicated cases, practicing full emotional neutrality becomes your strongest form of self-protection. Emotional neutrality just means responding only when it's necessary, without any emotional charge, without opening up your vulnerabilities, without showing anger, and without sharing emotional stories that could reawaken old attachments. People with manipulative patterns tend to watch your overall emotional energy far more closely than the actual words you say. They study your tone, your sense of urgency, how emotionally open you are, and how psychologically available you seem. Speaking with complete neutrality leaves them with almost nothing to work with, and that instantly tips the whole dynamic back in your favor. Neutrality was never about being emotionally cold or trying to punish anyone. It's simply about protecting your own unshakable emotional stability. The moment you cut off contact and truly stay gone, something inside their mind breaks. It's not an emotional shift, it's a psychological one. You've essentially taken away their mirror, and narcissists genuinely cannot function without a reflection. They don't move forward the way emotionally healthy people do. Instead, they react, they spiral, and they calculate. What comes next tends to follow a very predictable pattern. If any of this is hitting home for you, take a moment to subscribe, because understanding this psychology is exactly how you stay free instead of staying stuck reacting. When an extended period of no contact begins, a narcissist doesn't experience your absence as loss in the way most people would imagine. There's no healthy grieving process, no real heartbreak, and no honest reflection on what went wrong between you. What gets triggered instead is something far more destabilizing for them. It's a total loss of control. Control is the core currency of narcissistic psychology. Attention, reactions, emotional access, and even conflict all act as forms of supply that confirm their importance and their dominance. When you fully remove yourself and stay quiet, you're not just ending the relationship, you're collapsing the whole system that kept them regulated. Your absence creates a sudden, overwhelming power vacuum. They can no longer read you, provoke you, rewrite the story, or pull reassurance from your reactions. That silence turns into an unsolvable problem for them. In the early stage, their mind keeps searching for familiar levers to pull. They replay old interactions, not to understand how you feel, but to find points of leverage and influence. This is exactly why no contact pulls at them so strongly. They're completely used to pressing a button and getting an instant response. Silence gives them nothing back. A narcissist's brain is wired almost entirely around outside validation. So when that feedback loop suddenly vanishes, their anxiety spikes hard. That anxiety quickly turns into irritation and then into rage, because rage feels far more powerful to them than feeling helpless does. What looks like missing you from the outside is really intense frustration over losing access. They don't miss your physical presence. They miss your constant availability. They miss knowing they can still affect you. This is why they might start testing boundaries in indirect ways. They may watch you from a distance, ask people you both know about you, or make symbolic gestures meant to stir up your curiosity or your guilt. Each attempt works as a probe, a calculated way to check if control can be regained. The longer your silence goes on, the clearer the message becomes. They no longer hold any power over your emotional world. That realization is deeply threatening to a narcissistic identity. Without control, their sense of self starts to crumble because they define who they are almost entirely through the impact they have on other people. Your silence doesn't communicate anger or rejection. It communicates independence. And independence is the one thing a narcissist can't tolerate because it proves they're no longer central, no longer needed, and no longer in charge. Silence feels like complete rejection to a narcissist because their sense of self is built almost entirely on outside feedback. They don't carry a stable inner identity the way emotionally healthy people do. Instead, they regulate their self-worth through attention, reactions, validation, and emotional engagement from the people around them. When you go fully no contact and stay silent, that stream shuts off all at once. To a narcissist, silence is never neutral and it's never peaceful. It gets interpreted as dismissal, abandonment, and humiliation, all at the same time. In their mind, being ignored is the same thing as being devalued. Even negative attention feels better to them than no attention at all, because anger, confrontation, and drama still confirm that they matter.